We shall never completely understand the Japanese mind, but then they don't understand ours either. Otherwise, there would never have been a Pearl Harbor. But we must try to understand Japan because we have become locked in the closest of all relationships, war. Whether we like it or not, we and the Japanese are going to be at very close range for a very long time. So let's see what kind of people these Japanese really are, what they believe in, what they want, and how they get it. And if this tale begins to get a little fantastic, bear with us. We're dealing with the fantastic people. First, let's examine a typical Japanese soldier. His average height is 5 feet 3 inches. His average weight, 117 pounds. He and his brother soldiers are as much alike as photographic prints off the same negative. His pay is 10 yen, or about $2.36 a month. His personal equipment is simple but practical. Fully supplied with ammunition, the load he carries weighs about 60 pounds, more than half his weight. His uniform is ill-fitting, his appearance unsoldierly, even comic according to Western standards. At drill, he may lack precision. But he is hard. He is able. He knows his job. His endurance is phenomenal. He'd just as soon go over a mountain as around it. He lives on rice and fish, or occasionally rice and meat, but often on rice alone. And he's proud of it. He is prouder still of the fact that to be a soldier is the highest human achievement in Japan. He has been trained to be a soldier almost from birth, and into his tough little mind has been drilled and hammered the fanatical belief that Japanese are descendants of gods and destined to rule the earth and all who live on it. To this end, treachery, brutality, rape, and torture are all justified if used against non-Japanese. In combat, his single aim is to close with the enemy in hand-to-hand fighting. He believes that in the attack itself there is some mystic virtue by which greater numbers bearing superior weapons can be vanquished. In his mind, there is usually no question of choice between death and surrender. To him, death in battle is the attainment of an ideal. Where his flag leads, he follows in a blind emotional rush. For his flag not only represents his country, it is also the image of his god of gods. His flag is the rising sun, and the rising sun is the symbol of the emperor. To the Japanese, their emperor is the most holy of holies, their visible God. He is also their political ruler, the natural and supernatural, religion and politics all done up in a one-man package. Entrust to one man the powers of the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, the Premier of Soviet Russia. Add to them the powers of the Pope, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. Then top it all with the divine authority of our own Son of God, and you will begin to understand what Hirohito means to the Japanese, why they call him the God Emperor. For to the Japanese, Hirohito is a direct descendant of the sun, and what is so high, so brilliant, and so mighty as the sun? Accordingly, no one can stand above or look down upon the emperor. When he passes through the streets, all windows above the first floor must be tightly shuttered. The train to Tokyo from anywhere in Japan is the up train to Tokyo because the emperor lives there. Nor can the emperor be imitated in any way. Only his automobile may be maroon colored. Not even his tailor may touch the person of the emperor, for who would lay hands upon the sun? If you are Japanese, it actually hurts your eyes to look at Hirohito, just as it hurts your eyes to look at the blazing sun. Nor would anyone dream of handling his uncovered picture. When Hirohito's face appeared on the front cover of an American magazine, the Japanese government filed an official protest with the American State Department. Whatever takes place in Japan, it is he, the God Emperor, that causes it. From him all things emanate, and in him all things subsist. He makes the Japanese rice grow. He makes Japanese soldiers conquer the world. In his name, they bring to other people justice, enlightenment, truth, co-prosperity, and peace.
The year 1940 was a holy year in Japan, for the nation celebrated the 2600th anniversary of its founding by the first God Emperor, Jimmu.
If you are Japanese, you believe that Jimmu was the grandson of Prince Ninigi, who himself was the grandson of the sun goddess, Amaterasu Omikami. And she, the sun herself, said to Prince Ninigi, "Go down and rule over the luxuriant land of reed plains, which your posterity is to govern as monarchs." Whereon Ninigi descended from heaven to the land of reed plains and built a palace, and took to wife the daughter of a mountain deity, and she bore Ninigi a son. And Ninigi's son in turn took to wife the daughter of the god of the sea, and they too had a son, whom they named Jimmu. Exactly 2,600 years ago, Jimmu landed at Yamato and proclaimed himself emperor over all the islands, saying, "Let us extend our capital until it covers the 8 corners of the world under one roof." And in this way, the Japanese empire was created. Hirohito is the 128th direct descendant of the sun goddess. And since from the beginning the emperor gods have mingled their flesh with mortal flesh, it follows that all Japanese are cousins in divinity. The soldier and the wrestler and the priest, the woman in the rice fields, the factory worker, the geisha girl, the businessman, the diplomat, the fisherman off California. All are members of one family, whose blood is superior to the blood of any other race on earth, because it is mixed with the liquid sunshine of the gods. And what's more, they believe it. And being of divine origin, all their acts fall into the divine pattern called the Way of the Gods, or Shinto. Which brings us to the national religion of Japan, Shintoism.
Now, Shintoism will not be easy to understand, but since it is the heart, brain, and soul of the nation and dictates all Japanese actions for the living and for the dead, it is important that we try to understand it. According to Shinto, the population of Japan is one son of heaven, the emperor, 9 million minor gods, 75 million living people, and billions upon billions of ghosts, the spirits of all Japanese who have died in the past. These spirits stand watch over all Japan, follow their soldiers into battle, and serenely float around in every Japanese house where guests are frequently introduced to them. They are so near, the living merely have to clap their hands to call their attention. They are fed choice food, and incense is burned for them. Each living Japanese is merely a link in this endless chain of ghosts. He is identical with them except for the unimportant fact that he breathes and can be seen. Each living Japanese knows he is constantly surrounded by these spirits who guard him and watch over him to see that he obeys the emperor and follows the way of the gods. To watch over special Japanese activities, there is a host of minor gods. The volcano is a god. The lightning. There is a god of the silkworm, the god of the night wind. These pearl divers have a god, and annually they hold a ceremony for him. These farmers have a rice god to whom they offer prayers for a good harvest. These scarecrows are all gods of one kind or another. There are over 100,000 Shinto shrines in which these local gods and spirits are worshipped. For the living Japanese, Shinto decrees that all their actions must imitate the way of the gods, who handle chopsticks thusly, arrange flowers thusly, drink tea thusly, worship the emperor thusly, enter a room thusly, greet an acquaintance thusly. Now, on the surface, Shinto seems to be a nice, quaint religion for a nice, quaint people. And in the olden days, it used to be just that. But today, there's a diabolical joker in Shintoism. For since about 1870, the state has forced into the teachings of Shinto a mad, fanatical doctrine. A doctrine that has brought suffering and death to untold millions of innocent Asiatics. And now to thousands upon thousands of Americans. This doctrine is based on the divine command that Jimmu, the first god emperor, was supposed to have given his people 2,600 years ago. Let us extend the capital and cover the 8 corners of the world under one roof. To cover the 8 corners of the world under a Japanese roof. The Japs have a special name for Jimmu's divine command. It's called Hakko Ichiu, and it has become the national ambition of Japan.
From the viewpoint of Hakko Ichiu, the Emperor of Japan is the Emperor of all the races of the world. There are no southern seas. All the oceans are to be recognized as the great Japanese sea.
And in 1930, the modern American college-educated minister Matsuoka said,
"To save humanity in conformity with the great spirit in which the Emperor Jimmu founded the empire, Japan should take over the management of Asia. then extended to the rest of the world.
If you are Japanese, you believe you have been commanded by heaven to conquer all other races and peoples and put them under a Japanese rule. If you are Japanese, you believe the place of honor among the spirits is reserved for those who die in battle. For they become warrior gods and are enshrined in a sacred temple, Yasukuni Shrine. The names of soldiers killed in battle are written on little tablets and placed at night in the inner recesses of this most holy Yasukuni Shrine. That is the greatest honor that man can achieve in Japan, to die in battle and be enshrined in Yasukuni, where even the emperor comes to bow to him. That's why soldiers, when saying goodbye to each other, often say, "See you in Yasukuni." That's why mothers and wives accept the ashes of their dead soldiers without grief or sorrow. The silent victorious return, it is called. For the dead are warrior gods who live on beside them to be cherished and cared for, to be given food and drink and a lighted cigarette to smoke. That's why Jap soldiers would rather be killed than surrender. For to be killed means they become warrior gods. To surrender means everlasting shame and dishonor to them and their family and all their ancestors. If you are Japanese, you believe these things implicitly.
Banzai! Banzai!
But if you are not Japanese, what then is the real Japan? The Japan of the geographer, the anthropologist, and the historian. The Japan of which the Japanese themselves know little or nothing. The name Japan comes from two Chinese words, ji and pen, the literal translation of which is the land where the sun comes from. The Chinese called it that because Japan lay to the east. Geographers say Japan is a chain of volcanic islands, 1,200 miles long and an average of 120 miles wide, her total land mass being a little larger than the state of California. Rocky and mountainous, only 16% of Japan is suitable for farming. Every human being in Japan lives within sight of mountains, many of them from 6,000 to 12,000 feet high. There are some 50 active volcanoes scattered through Japan. On an average of 4 times a day, Japan has earthquakes, severe shocks occurring about once every 2.5 years, with one disastrous earthquake about every 25 years. There are some 45 cities with a population of over 100,000, only 3 of which are beyond the range of 16-inch naval guns. Tokyo, the capital, with a population of 7,900,000, is the 3rd largest city in the world. And what of the people of Japan and their so-called divine origin? Anthropologists say the original inhabitants of the islands were a hairy barbarian people called Ainus. Later on, fierce Mongolian tribes moved in and began conquering the Ainus. Still later, other tribes from many sources arrived on the scene. The fusion of all these tribes and races resulted in the Japanese of today, not of one pure blood, but of a well-mixed plasma cocktail of Ainu, Mongol, Manchu, Malaysian. Of the history of Japan, historians say that somewhere around the beginning of the Christian era, they elevated to leadership a chief or high priest, in this case the emperor, who claimed to have an inside track with the gods. This evolved into Shintoism, and the emperor's son myth became the dominant religion. But the early emperors had little political power, for the islands were really divided into many independent and quarrelsome tribes, ruled over by powerful barons or daimyos. These daimyos each had large, well-paid private armies of warriors called samurai. The samurai were the important and privileged class, real aristocrats who lived off the fat of the land without working. As a badge of rank, they wore 2 swords, a short sword for committing harakiri when captured or disgraced, and a large two-handed sword they fought with. With this sword, it was their privilege to lop off heads, arms, or ears of the peasants, either for practice or amusement. To further set themselves apart from the common herd, the samurai developed a code of rules for themselves called Bushido, the code of the warrior. Bushido extolled absolute loyalty to one's superior and reckless bravery in battle. But most important, Bushido not only sanctioned double-dealing and treachery, but looked upon it as an art to be cultivated. It encouraged ambush. Jump a man from behind when he's unarmed and you've got a club. When he's alone and you've got a gang. That's Bushido, the art of treachery and the double cross, the national code of Japan. Harakiri was also a privilege of the samurai. When condemned to death, they were allowed to kill themselves rather than be beheaded. The executioner's axe was for the common people. As a result, harakiri became an elaborate ceremony, a form of art that showed bravery and indifference to pain. A man's son or his best friend stood by with a big sword to chop his head off in case he lost his nerve. The daimyos and their paid samurai engaged in unending bloody civil wars against each other for the right to become the shogun. Being the shogun meant being top dog among all the daimyos, a dictator of dictators, ruling the islands in the name of the emperor, who was kept in the background as a religious figurehead.
In the year 1592, the powerful shogun Hideyoshi thought he and Japan were strong enough to make their first bid to cover the world with a Japanese rule. And as they have ever since, they picked China as the first victim. Hideyoshi invaded Korea, but Chinese from other provinces came to the aid of the Koreans. The Japs were stopped, and when Hideyoshi died suddenly, the invasion was called off. But they did a complete job of plunder, taking back with them all the wealth and art they could carry. They also brought back 30,000 pickled ears and noses of Chinese and Koreans killed in battle. These they buried in what is now known as the ear mound in the city of Kyoto. It was around this period that something new came into the midst of this warring, bloodthirsty people. Something new and strange. In the year 1521, Magellan had sailed around the world to the Philippines. In his wake came Spanish and Portuguese missionaries who eventually visited the Japanese islands. The strange new thing they brought was Christianity, the revolutionary doctrine of peace on earth and the equality and brotherhood of man. Here was something that dignified the lowly Japanese serfs as human beings. Soon there were some 200 churches and over 200,000 converts. The warlords became frightened. These foreign medicine men were teaching tolerance, brotherly love, peace, and even equality, so they acted. 137 churches were destroyed in Nagasaki. All Christian converts in Tokyo were burned at the stake. Throw out the West. Throw out its poisonous doctrine of peace. And with that, Japan closed its doors. No one could leave Japan. No one could enter. Foreign sailors shipwrecked on their shores were tortured and beheaded. For 200 years, Japan remained completely isolated. And in those 200 years, the world advanced more than it had in the previous 1,000 years. Voltaire lived, and Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, Pasteur. The Americans fought a revolution for the belief that all men were created equal. The French fought for liberty, equality, and fraternity. The power of steam was discovered, and the steamboat and steam engine began to narrow the oceans and continents. The telegraph was invented. China was opened up to the trade of the world. But during all this time, Japan was closed. No news reached her shores. She remained a nation blacked out from the rest of the world, still living in the Middle Ages. Then, in 1853, just 92 years ago, Commodore Perry's American fleet of 4 ships sailed into Yokohama, bearing a message from President Fillmore offering the hand of friendship and the interest of trade. The Japanese warlords woke with a shock from their 200 years of self-imposed isolation. They realized that the hairy white barbarian had machines and weapons that made him powerful. If the sons of heaven were to rule the earth, their spears and swords would be of little avail. Also, they realized how weak and divided they really were compared to Western nations. Hastily, the feuding barons stopped fighting among themselves and joined together. But they needed a central figure around whom they could rally. Available was the God Emperor, who up to now had been more or less of a stooge. So, in 1868, the warlords did away with the position of shogun and elevated Emperor Meiji to supreme dictatorship over all Japan, reserving for themselves and themselves alone the right to speak for him and to guide his policies, a position the warlords have hung on to ever since. Now for a strong military. The paid warriors, the samurai, were too few for a national army, so they introduced another revolutionary idea into Japanese life. The sons of peasants were suddenly permitted the great privilege of bearing arms, and it was a great privilege, for being a soldier almost meant being a noble. And to sell this program to the Jap masses, the warlords shrewdly used religion. They revised ancient Shintoism to suit their purpose and forced emperor worship, military glorification, and fanatic thoughts of conquest to be preached by all Shinto priests.